The subcommittee will come to order, and good afternoon, and welcome to everyone joining us today. I particularly want to welcome our witnesses, Ambassador Ronald Lauder, the President of the World Jewish Congress, Mr. Roger Kuckerman, President of the Representative Council of Jewish Institutions of France, and Mr. Dan Asmussen, Chairperson of the Danish Jewish Community. In 1982, during my first term in Congress, I traveled with the National Conference on Soviet Jewry to Moscow and Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, to meet with Jewish refuseniks in their homes and to engage Soviet leaders. Mark Levin invited me to be on that trip and has been a friend and a mentor ever since. For hours on end, Mark and I and a delegation that included former Democrat member of this committee, he was the ranking member, Sam Gajenson, heard stories of Soviet physical and mental abuse, systemic harassment, gulags and psychiatric prisons, and an array of seemingly wanton, brutal acts of anti-Semitism. To apply for an exit visa, a universally recognized human right, which on paper at least the Soviet Union had acceded to, was to invite the cruelty and the wrath of the KGB and other small-minded, morally stunted thugs. To courageously seek freedom rendered you ineligible for employment in Lenin's farcical workers' paradise. The Soviet system, militantly atheistic and morally incoherent, wouldn't let Jews leave, but didn't want Jews to stay either, a bizarre paradox. To a brand new 27-year-old congressman, it was bewildering and deeply troubling. Why do they hate Jews? And I pondered that question over and over again. And why the anti-Semitic obsession? Well, sadly, it has not changed, and it is getting worse. This is the 9th hearing I've chaired on combating anti-Semitism. The first was right after the Republicans took control. We put together a hearing called The Rising Tide of Anti-Semitism. And even though the Soviet Union had matriculated to Russia, we heard how anti-Semitism had become privatized, and the government was doing little or nothing to mitigate its occurrence. And we also heard that it was rising everywhere as well. However, never in modern times has the need to defend Jews everywhere been greater. My next hearings will be on the explosion of anti-Semitic hate on college campuses and Jewish community security, which increasingly has to be addressed and real dollars put in place to lessen that threat as well. For the first time since the Holocaust, the physical security of Jewish communities in Europe have become a top-level concern. Our hearing today will examine the horrifying state of affairs facing Jewish communities in Europe at this time. At a congressional hearing that I had in 2002, Dr. Shimon Samuels of the Wiesenthal Center in Paris testified, and I quote him, "The Holocaust for 30 years after the war acted as a protective Teflon against blatant anti-Semitic expression, especially in Europe. That Teflon," he said, "has eroded, and what was considered distasteful and politically incorrect is becoming simply an opinion. But cocktail chatter," he went on to say, "at fine English dinners can end as Molotov cocktails against synagogues." That's exactly where we are now, 13 years later. What was anti-Semitic cocktail chatter then has now led to 2 people shot and killed at a synagogue at a Jewish cultural center in Copenhagen, and 4 killed in a terrorist attack on a kosher supermarket in Paris. These are only the most recent outrages and a terrifying increase in extreme anti-Semitic violence. Let's not forget the May 2014 murder of 4 people at the Jewish Museum in Brussels and the March 2012 murder of 3 Jewish children and a rabbi at a Jewish school in the French city of Toulouse. Each of these 4 attacks were perpetrated by a killer with links to a jihadist movement. For far too long, far too many government officials, many of them mired in what Natan Sharansky summarized as the application of double standards and the demonization of Israel, have reacted weakly to this danger. Meanwhile, the threat has grown exponentially. Today, at least 3,000, perhaps more than 5,000 EU citizens have left to join ISIS in Syria, Iraq, and other conflict zones. This is the recent estimates of Europol, the EU's joint criminal intelligence body. It would be criminally irresponsible not to take this number as a warning of much worse to come and to make every effort to prepare accordingly. And of course, that also applies to those who have gone to those battlefields from the United States. In 2002, in response to what appeared to be a sudden, frightening spike in anti-Semitism in several countries, including the U.S., I first proposed the idea of conferences on combating anti-Semitism under the auspices of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Convinced we had an escalating crisis on our hands, I teamed with several OSCE partners, including Germany and members of the Bundestag, to push for action and reform. Many of the people in the NGOs present in this room played leading and pivotal roles in that effort. Those efforts directly led to the creation of the OSCE's personal representative on combating anti-Semitism, which has been filled with great distinction by Rabbi Andy Baker since 2009. Rabbi Baker has done outstanding work, dogged and energetic. He has been the driver behind everything the OSCE has accomplished in fighting anti-Semitism in recent years. My efforts with partners to put anti-Semitism on the OSCE agenda also led to important conferences in Vienna, Berlin, in Bucharest, and last fall in Berlin. In each of these participating states have made solemn, tangible commitments to put our words into action. In some countries, progress indeed has been made. Institutions to fight anti-Semitism have been created, and they have done excellent work. They've also done the all-important work of chronicling it. As Sharansky said at one of our hearings, he said, if you don't chronicle the crime, how can you fight it? But it has not been enough to reverse the new anti-Semitism sweeping Europe, and has failed miserably to anticipate and prevent the arrival of jihadist anti-Semitism in Europe. That is why we are here today, to review, recommit, and re-energize efforts to stop the evil of anti-Semitic violence that is threatening the Jewish communities of Europe. And again, this is worldwide, but our focus primarily is on Europe today. We need to learn more about what must be done to ensure community security, how the communities see the threats they face, what they are doing about them, what the European governments are doing about them, and how everyone can and must do more. We can also learn how the U.S. should do more and be more effective in this fight. And this, especially in light of World Jewish Congress President Lauder's all-important question, who will lead off our witnesses, when he says in testimony today, where is the United States? Ambassador Lauder will say, once again, like the 1930s, European Jews live in fear. In my travels to all of these communities, he goes on, I am asked the same question around Europe and the world. Where is the United States? Why isn't the United States leading the world in this crisis?